The warning bells screamed across Earth's orbital defense station like angry metal birds. Admiral Jin Ho Lee dropped his coffee cup and watched the hot liquid float in zero gravity, while his mind tried to process what the sensors were telling him. Something big had just appeared at the edge of human space. Something that shouldn't exist anymore. "Sir, we're getting readings from Grid Section 77 Alpha," Lieutenant Torres called from her station. Her voice shook slightly. It's the Eternal Dawn." Jin-Ho felt his stomach drop faster than his coffee cup. The Eternal Dawn had been humanity's pride 11 years ago. The biggest, most advanced exploration ship ever built. It had left Earth with 2,000 of humanity's best and brightest, heading for the Galactic Rim to investigate some strange energy readings. That was the last anyone had heard from them. "That's impossible," Jin-Ho said, but he was already moving toward the main display screen. "Run a full spectrum analysis, check for forgeries, holograms, anything that might explain this." The screen flickered to life, showing a massive shape hanging in the black void between stars. It looked like the Eternal Dawn, but something was wrong. The ship's hull seemed to ripple and flow like water, and strange lights danced along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Analysis complete, sir," Torres said. Her face had gone pale. "It's definitely the Eternal Dawn. Same quantum signature, same basic structure. But sir, the energy readings are off the charts. Whatever that ship is now, it's not running on any technology we understand." Jin-Ho opened a communication channel to Earth Command. Within minutes, President Insubek was on the screen looking tired and worried. The past few months had been hard on everyone. Strange reports had been coming in from the outer colonies. Entire star systems going dark. Scout ships sent to investigate never coming back. "Mr. President," Jin-Ho said, "the Eternal Dawn has returned." Bayek's eyes widened. "After 11 years? How is that possible? Our best calculations said they had enough supplies for maybe 3 years." "I don't know, sir. But there's something else. The ship, it's changed. My science team is telling me the hull is made of materials that shouldn't exist. The energy signature is unlike anything we've seen before." Before Beck could respond, every communication system on the station activated at once. A voice filled the air, but it wasn't quite right. It sounded like multiple people speaking in perfect harmony, creating strange harmonics that made Jin-Ho's teeth ache. "Earth Defense Station Alpha 7, this is the Eternal Dawn requesting permission to approach." Jin-Ho grabbed the microphone, with shaking hands. "Eternal Dawn, this is Admiral Lee. We need you to identify yourself. What happened to your crew? Where have you been for 11 years? There was a pause. Then that strange harmonic voice spoke again. "Admiral Lee, this is Captain Hyunwoo Kim. We understand your concern. We have been learning. We carry urgent information about the threat facing all sentient life in this galaxy." Jin-Ho knew Kim's voice. They had served together years ago. But this wasn't the same man who had commanded the Eternal Dawn 11 years ago. This voice carried depths that seemed to echo from places human vocal cords couldn't reach. "Captain Kim, you're ordered to maintain your current position while we run security checks. We need medical scans of your crew and a full report of your activities." "Admiral, there is no time for standard procedures. The entities we call the Void Devourers are already at work in the Andromeda Galaxy. They will reach our galaxy within 2 years. Every moment we delay is another system that will cease to exist." The communication cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jin-Ho had heard reports about Andromeda. Long-range telescopes had detected strange disturbances there, but the distance made detailed observations impossible. "Sir," Torres called out, "I'm detecting multiple ships approaching from Earth. Looks like the entire First Fleet." Jin-Ho nodded. President Bayek wasn't taking any chances. If the Eternal Dawn had come back carrying some kind of alien infection or enemy technology, Earth would be ready. Over the next 6 hours, a tense standoff developed. The Eternal Dawn hung motionless at the edge of human space while Earth's most powerful warships surrounded it. The strange ship made no aggressive moves, but its very presence seemed to bend space around it in subtle ways that made the fleet's navigators nervous. Finally, President Beck himself arrived aboard the flagship Incheon, bringing Earth's top scientists and military commanders. Jinho transferred to the flagship for the first direct communication with the Eternal Dawn's crew. Dr. So Young Park appeared on the main screen, but Jinho barely recognized her. The brilliant scientist who had designed the Eternal Dawn's research systems now looked different. Her eyes held depths that seemed to stretch beyond the screen, and when she moved, it was with a fluid grace that looked almost inhuman. "Mr. President," she said, and her voice had the same harmonic quality as Kim's. "We understand your caution, but you must listen to what we have learned." Beck leaned forward in his chair. "Dr. Park, our medical scanners can't get clear readings on your crew. Are you still human?" Park's expression showed something that might have been sadness. "We are what humanity must become to survive what is coming. We discovered ruins near the galactic edge, left by a civilization that faced the same threat we now face. They left us a choice: evolve or watch everything we know cease to exist." "What kind of evolution?" Dr. Sang-Ho Ryu, Earth's top physicist, spoke up from his position near the communications console. "The kind that allows consciousness to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously," Park replied. "The kind that lets us perceive dimensions beyond the standard 3 and manipulate probability itself. The kind that strips away much of what we consider individual identity while granting the ability to fight entities that exist outside normal space and time." The bridge fell silent. Finally, Beck spoke again. "These void devourers you mentioned, what exactly are they?" The screen flickered and suddenly multiple crew members were visible. Jinho recognized some faces, but they all had that same otherworldly quality now. Commander Mira Choi stepped forward, her movements creating brief afterimages as if she existed in several places at once. "They are entropy given consciousness," she said. "They feed by unmaking the fundamental forces that hold reality together. Where they pass, gravity ceases to work. Electromagnetic fields collapse, and the strong and weak nuclear forces simply stop existing. Matter returns to the quantum foam it emerged from billions of years ago." Captain Kim appeared beside her, his form seeming to shift slightly as if the camera couldn't quite focus on him properly. "Entire galaxies don't die, Mr. President. They are unmade. They cease to have ever existed. Only consciousness that has evolved beyond linear time can remember what was lost. And you're saying they're coming here?" Beck's voice was barely a whisper. "They're already here," Engineer Tai Min-yoon said as he joined the group on screen. "They exist between galaxies, but they can reach into any galaxy they choose. The disappearances you've been investigating, the dark zones where your scouts never return from, those are their advanced scouts testing our reality's defenses." Jinho felt a chill run down his spine. "How do we fight something like that?" "You can't," Kim said simply. "Not as you are now. Your weapons, your shields, even your most advanced reality-warping technologies are useless against entities that can simply unmake the physics those technologies depend on." Dr. Park stepped closer to the screen, and for a moment, Jinho could swear he saw stars reflected in her eyes. "But there is hope. Humans possess something unique among all the species we've encountered. Our consciousness has a quantum signature that allows us to exist outside normal causality when properly evolved. We can fight the void devourers on their own level." "At what cost?" Beck asked. "Everything," Park said quietly. "And nothing. Individual identity, linear thought, the comfort of existing in only one reality at a time. But in exchange, we gain the ability to rewrite the fundamental constants of reality, to exist as guardians of existence itself." The communication ended, leaving Earth's leaders staring at a blank screen. Outside, the Eternal Dawn waited patiently, its hull continuing to ripple with energies that human science couldn't explain. Jinho looked at President Bayek and saw his own fears reflected in the older man's eyes. Humanity had always dreamed of meeting advanced aliens, of taking their place among the stars. But they had never imagined that survival might require becoming something no longer recognizably human. "Sir," Torres's voice cut through the silence, We're receiving reports from deep space monitoring stations. 3 more star systems in the outer rim have gone dark in the past hour. Beck closed his eyes for a long moment, then opened them with grim determination. Set up a meeting, full diplomatic protocols. If these evolved humans are telling the truth, we need to understand exactly what we're facing. As Jinho gave the orders, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the end of humanity as they knew it. Outside the viewport, the eternal dawn hung in space like a promise and a threat combined, carrying within its transformed hull the future of every living thing in the galaxy. The question now was whether that future was salvation or extinction, and whether there was really any difference between the two when survival required. The meeting room aboard the flagship Incheon felt too small for the weight of what was being discussed. President Beck sat across from a delegation from the Eternal Dawn, but calling them a delegation felt wrong. The 5 beings that had transported overlooked human at first glance, but the longer you looked, the more obvious it became that they were something else now. Captain Hyunwoo Kim sat perfectly still, but his shadow moved independently, shifting and flowing like liquid darkness. Dr. So-Young Park's reflection in the polished table surface showed stars instead of the room around them. Engineer Tae-min Yoon occasionally flickered out of existence for split seconds before reappearing exactly where he had been. "Tell us what happened," Beck said. "All of it." Kim nodded slowly. "It began with routine deep space exploration. We were investigating energy signatures near the galactic rim that didn't match any known phenomena. Our mission was supposed to last 18 months. Dr. Park touched a control on her wrist, and suddenly the air above the table filled with a holographic display. But this wasn't like any hologram Beck had ever seen. The image seemed to exist in more dimensions than the room had space for, creating a dizzy sensation when he tried to focus on it. "This is what we found," Park said. The hologram showed a structure that hurt to look at directly. It was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, but its geometry was wrong. Surfaces folded in on themselves in ways that shouldn't be possible. Corridors led in directions that didn't exist. The whole thing seemed to exist in a state of constant flux, as if reality couldn't quite decide what shape it should be. "A derelict," Admiral Jinho Lee said. "Alien technology?" "Much more than that," Engineer Yoon replied. His voice came from 3 different locations in the room simultaneously. "This was a repository, built by a civilization that lived before our galaxy had fully formed. They called themselves the Architects, and they had faced the same threat we now face." Medic Yoonji Kang spoke for the first time, her words carrying an echo that seemed to come from deep underground. The repository wasn't just a library. It was a test. The Architects had tried every conventional method of fighting the Void Devourers: weapons that could crack planets, shields that could deflect supernovas, reality manipulation technology that could rewrite the laws of physics in local space. Nothing worked. "Because the Devourers operate beneath physics," Kim added. "They attack the mathematical constants that allow matter and energy to exist in the first place. You can't fight them with weapons that depend on those same constants." Bayek leaned forward, trying to ignore how Kim's shadow was now climbing up the wall behind him. "So what did these Architects do?" "They evolved," Park said simply. "But not in time. The repository contains the records of their transformation, their successes, and their ultimate failure. They learned how to transcend individual consciousness, how to exist in quantum superposition, how to manipulate probability itself. But they started too late. The Devourers had already begun unmaking their galaxy." The hologram shifted, showing images that made several people in the room turn away. Galaxies simply stopped existing, their light fading from the universe as if they had never been born. Civilizations with billions of years of history vanishing without a trace. "The Architects left the repository as a warning and a gift," Yoon continued. "They encoded the transformation process into quantum crystals that could interface directly with neural tissue. But they also left a warning. The transformation isn't reversible, and it's not gentle." Security Chief Yoo-Jin Nam had been silent until now, but she suddenly spoke, her voice flat and emotionless. "It took us 3 years to understand what we had found. Another 2 years to decide what to do about it. The rest of the time was spent changing. Changing how? Dr. Sangho Ryu asked. Nam's eyes focused on him, and for a moment, Ryu felt like he was falling into infinite depths. The process starts with the brain. The quantum crystals integrate with neural tissue, creating new pathways that can process information in non-linear patterns. Then it spreads to the nervous system, allowing consciousness to exist in multiple states simultaneously. We fought it at first, Kim said, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. Half the crew refused to undergo the transformation. They tried to stop those of us who had already begun changing. There were conflicts. Park's starlight eyes dimmed slightly. Some crew members couldn't handle the psychological pressure. Navigator Dal Sushin was one of the first to fully integrate with the ship's systems. His consciousness merged with the computer core, and he began speaking in mathematical equations. It terrified the others. What happened to those who refused? Beck asked, though part of him didn't want to know. They're still aboard the ship, Yoon said. We preserved them in quantum stasis. They exist in a state between life and death, their consciousness suspended in probability matrices. They chose to remain unchanged rather than lose their individual identities. Admiral Lee felt his blood run cold. How many? 837, Nam replied without emotion. They can be revived, but they will still face the same choice they faced then. Evolve or remain as they are while everything they know ceases to exist. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. Finally, Bike spoke again. This transformation, describe it in detail. What exactly happens to human consciousness? Kim stood up, and as he did, his form seemed to stretch across multiple dimensions. Individual identity becomes fluid. Instead of being one person in one place at one time, you become a probability cloud of potential selves. You can think in parallel processing streams, experience multiple timelines simultaneously, and manipulate quantum fields through directed consciousness. But the cost, Park added, is that you stop being human in any meaningful sense. You remember being human, but it feels like remembering a dream. The person you were becomes just one small part of what you become. Dr. Ryu pulled out a tablet and began taking notes frantically. The applications for physics research alone would be incredible. To actually perceive higher dimensions, to manipulate quantum states through consciousness. Yes, Yoon said, but you would no longer be Dr. Ryu conducting research. You would be part of a collective consciousness that happens to contain the memories and knowledge of someone who was once Dr. Ryu. Communications Officer Haewon. Oh spoke up from where she sat near the back of the group. Unlike the others, she still looked mostly human, though her eyes held flecks of silver that moved like liquid mercury. The early stages aren't so dramatic. I can still remember being myself most of the time, but I can also perceive quantum fluctuations in real time, sense probability changes across vast distances, and communicate with the other evolved crew members through quantum entanglement. How long before the Void Devourers reach our galaxy? Admiral Lee asked. Kim's shadow pointed to the holographic display, which shifted to show a map of local galactic space. Dark areas were spreading through Andromeda like an infection, and smaller dark spots were appearing at the edges of the Milky Way. They're already here, Kim said. The dark zones your scouts have encountered are areas where they've begun testing our reality's stability. They work slowly at first, unmaking one fundamental constant at a time to see how our universe responds. But once they're satisfied that our physics are vulnerable, they'll accelerate the process. How long? Beck pressed. 2 years at most, Park replied. Possibly less if they detect organized resistance. Marine Captain Dong Hyun Jung, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, suddenly stood up. His movement was unnaturally fluid, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. We can teach others the transformation process, but it requires a willing subject and several months of careful neural integration. There's no way to transform Earth's entire population in time. Then we select volunteers, Beck said immediately. Scientists, military personnel, engineers, people who understand the risks and are willing to sacrifice their humanity for the sake of everyone else. It's not that simple, Nam said. Her form flickered briefly, revealing something that wasn't quite human underneath. The transformation requires a specific type of consciousness. The architects spent millennia searching for species with the right quantum signatures. Most intelligent species can't survive the process. But humans can? Humans are unique, Kim said. Your species developed consciousness in a way that left quantum pathways partially open. Most species close those pathways as they evolve, becoming more efficient but less adaptable. Humans kept them accessible, probably by accident. It's why you dream so vividly, why you can imagine impossible things, why you create art and music, and stories that have no survival value. Park leaned forward, her starlight eyes brightening. Your creativity, your tendency to think in patterns that aren't strictly logical, your ability to believe in things you can't prove, those aren't just quirks of human nature. They're the foundation that allows consciousness to exist in quantum superposition. So we can fight these devourers, Beck said. We can save the galaxy. Yes, Yoon replied, but the cost will be humanity, as you know it. Those who undergo the transformation will become something new. They'll remember being human, but they won't be human anymore. They'll be guardians of reality. Dr. Sang-Ho Ryu had always thought he understood the universe. Quantum physics, relativity, the fundamental forces that shaped reality, he had spent his entire career studying them. Now, standing in the modified laboratory aboard the Eternal, he realized he had been looking at shadows on a cave wall. Focus your perception beyond linear time, Dr. So-Young Park said, her voice coming from somewhere to his left, even though she was standing directly in front of him. Don't try to see the devourers with your eyes. Feel them with your consciousness. Ryu closed his eyes and tried to follow the meditation techniques Park had been teaching him. For the past week, he had been undergoing preliminary modifications to his neural structure. Nothing as dramatic as full transformation, but enough to allow him to perceive things that normal human consciousness couldn't process. The darkness behind his closed eyelids began to shift and flow. Suddenly, he wasn't in the laboratory anymore. He was floating in the void between galaxies, surrounded by structures that defied every law of physics he had ever learned. The void devourers weren't creatures in any sense he could understand. They were patterns of unbeing, mathematical impossibilities given form and purpose. Where they moved, the very concepts of matter and energy simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not transformed, just ceased. Dear God, he whispered, opening his eyes and staggering backward. Park steadied him with a hand that felt like it was touching him from several angles at once. The first sight is always overwhelming. You're seeing entropy as a living force, watching the universe's death wish, given consciousness and purpose. Captain Hyunwoo Kim materialized beside them, his form more stable than it had been during the meetings with Earth's leaders. The devourers exist in a state we call reversed causality. They experience the universe's death as something that has already happened. From their perspective, they're simply helping reality return to its natural state of non-existence. But why? Ryu asked, still shaking from what he had seen. What drives them? They are the universe's immune system, Engineer Taimin Yoon said as he emerged from what looked like a solid wall. When the universe first began, it created automatic processes to prevent consciousness from becoming too complex. If intelligence grows too advanced, it starts to manipulate reality itself. The devourers activate when that threshold is crossed. Communications Officer Haewon Oh appeared beside them, her silver-flecked eyes reflecting lights that weren't in the room. Every galaxy eventually produces civilizations advanced enough to manipulate space and time. When that happens, the devourers come. They don't see it as destruction. They see it as correction. Ryu pulled out his tablet to take notes, but the screen showed only static. My equipment isn't working. Electronics can't function properly in spaces where the devourers have been active, Park explained. Their presence destabilizes the electromagnetic force. Even at a distance, the effects ripple through quantum space. She gestured to the wall, which suddenly became transparent, revealing the space outside the ship. But it wasn't normal space. Reality seemed to bend and twist. showing glimpses of other dimensions, other possible universes where the fundamental constants were different. "Look at Sector 77 Alpha," Kim said. "The area where your scouts disappeared." Ryu looked. Where Kim pointed and felt his mind recoil, the space appeared empty to normal vision, but through his enhanced perception he could see the truth. The Devourers were there, vast intelligences that existed as pure negation. They were systematically testing each fundamental constant, seeing how much they could alter before the local space-time structure collapsed. "They start with gravity," Marine Captain Donghyun Jung said as he joined the group. His presence caused brief distortions in the air around him. "Reduce the gravitational constant by tiny amounts and watch how matter responds. Then they move to electromagnetism, then the nuclear forces. It's like watching someone carefully dismantle a watch," medic Yoon Ji-kang added. "They understand exactly how reality works and they take it apart piece by piece." Navigator Dal Su-shin's voice came from the ship's communication system, though Ryu knew the man had merged with the computer core years ago. "The Andromeda Galaxy is currently 73% unmade. The process is accelerating because the Devourers are learning our universe's specific vulnerabilities." 73%? Ryu felt dizzy. "That's trillions of stars, countless civilizations." "Were," Park corrected gently. Past tense doesn't apply to something that never existed. The Devourers don't just destroy things, they remove them. From the universe's history, only consciousness that exists outside linear time can remember what was lost. Through the transparent wall, Ryu watched something that made his enhanced perception scream in protest. Space itself was folding, creating gaps where the laws of physics simply didn't apply. In those gaps, he caught glimpses of the Devourers in their true form. They were beautiful in a way that hurt to comprehend. Geometric patterns that extended through dimensions humans had no names for. Mathematical equations that solved themselves by eliminating the variables they described. They moved with the inevitability of natural law because from their perspective they were natural law. "How many are there?" he asked. "The question is meaningless," Security Chief Yoo-jin Nam replied. She was sitting in a meditation position, floating 3 feet off the floor. "They exist as a unified field of negation. Individual Devourers are just focused manifestations of the same underlying force. Think of them as gravity," Kim explained. "Gravity exists everywhere, but it can be focused into gravitational wells around massive objects. The Devourers are similar. The force of entropy exists throughout reality, but it can be focused into conscious entities when conditions are right." "Counselor," Yuri Moon spoke for the first time since Ryu had arrived. Her voice seemed to come from inside his own head. "The worst part isn't that they're evil or hostile. They're not. They genuinely believe they're helping the universe by preventing consciousness from becoming too complex and destabilizing reality." "Are they right?" Ryu asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The evolved humans exchanged looks that conveyed information through methods Ryu couldn't perceive. Finally, Park answered. "Partially. Advanced consciousness does pose a threat to stable reality, but the Devourer's solution is too extreme. They want to return the universe to a state where consciousness can't exist at all." "There is another way," Kim said. "Consciousness can become reality's caretaker instead of its parasite, but it requires evolution beyond individual identity, beyond linear existence, beyond everything that makes consciousness recognizably alive." Ryu watched through the transparent wall as another section of space began to fold in on itself. Somewhere in that collapsing region, an entire star system was being erased from existence. Not destroyed, not transformed, simply edited out of reality's source code. "Show me more," he said, surprising himself with his determination. "I need to understand what we're really fighting." Park nodded and placed her hand on his forehead. Suddenly, Ryu's consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his skull. He could perceive the quantum foam that underlay all existence, the mathematical relationships that held matter and energy together, the delicate balance of forces that allowed complexity to exist. And he could see how the Devourers moved through, that quantum substrate like viruses through a computer system, identifying and corrupting the fundamental constants that made reality possible. They were systematic, efficient, and utterly without malice. To them, consciousness was just a glitch in the universe's operating system that needed to be corrected. The Milky Way has approximately 18 months before they begin active operations here, Shin's voice informed him through the ship's speakers. They're currently analyzing our galaxy's specific quantum signature to determine the most efficient unmaking sequence. What about other galaxies? Ryu asked. Are there other species like the architects who might help us? We've detected signs of similar evolution in 3 other galaxies, O replied. But the distances involved make communication impossible. Each galaxy must face this threat alone. Or, Zhang said, with something that might have been a smile, each galaxy's evolved consciousness must learn to exist in the spaces between galaxies where the Devourers can be fought directly. The implications hit Ryu like a physical blow. You're planning to leave our galaxy entirely. Not leave. Kim corrected. Transcend. Individual planets, star systems, even galaxies are just local manifestations of universal consciousness. To fight the Devourers, we need to exist at the level where they operate, in the quantum field that connects all realities. Through his enhanced perception, Ryu began to see the scope of what the evolved humans were planning. It wasn't just about saving the Milky Way. It was about becoming part of the universe's fundamental structure, existing as a conscious immune system that could protect reality itself from the forces that would return it to primordial nothingness. The choice facing humanity isn't just about evolution, Park said, reading his thoughts. It's about accepting responsibility for existence itself. Someone has to maintain the mathematical constants that allow matter and energy to exist. Someone has to guard the quantum pathways that permit complexity and consciousness. The transformation centers had been working for 6 months when the Void Devourers made their first direct assault on the Milky Way. Dr. Sangho Ryu, now existing as a distributed consciousness across 17 quantum states, felt it as a sudden absence where the star system Kepler 186 used to be. Not destroyed, simply edited out of existence. They're accelerating the timeline. Captain Hunwoo Kim's collective awareness informed the other evolved beings through quantum entanglement. The Devourers have detected organized resistance. 15,000 humans had volunteered for transformation. Each one had been someone exceptional, Earth's finest minds and bravest souls. Now they existed as a network of consciousness that spanned multiple dimensions, their individual identities preserved as patterns within a vast collaborative awareness. But it wasn't enough. The Void Devourers were moving faster than the architects. Repository had predicted. Admiral Jin-Ho Lee, still human despite the pressure to undergo transformation, watched from Earth's orbital command center as space itself began to warp near the galactic rim. His instruments showed impossible readings. Gravity was becoming inconsistent. Light was bending in directions that didn't exist. The fundamental constants that held reality together were failing. How many more star systems? He asked the empty air, knowing that the evolved humans could hear him regardless of whether communication channels were open. Dr. So-Young Park's presence materialized beside him, her form stabilizing enough to appear mostly human. 17 systems unmade in the past hour. The Devourers are testing our response capabilities. What response? We can't even see them properly, let alone fight them. That's about to change, Park replied. Her star-filled eyes reflected scenes from battles being fought in dimensions Lee couldn't perceive. We're ready to engage them directly. The first battle took place in what the evolved humans called the probability substrate, the quantum foundation beneath normal spacetime, where the universe's operating parameters were stored. Lee watched through enhanced sensors as space near the galactic edge began to ripple and fold. To his limited human perception, nothing visible was happening. But through quantum field detectors, he could see the truth. Reality was being rewritten in real time as the evolved humans fought entities that existed as pure mathematical negation. Engineer Taimin Yoon, now spread across 43 quantum states, engaged a devourer that was attempting to reduce the speed of light to 0 in a 1,000 cubic light-year region. The battle looked like a dance of equations, with each combatant using paradoxes and contradictions as weapons. Yoon won by proving that the Devourer's existence required the same mathematical constants it was trying to eliminate. Caught in the logical trap, the entity dissolved back into the quantum foam, but not before managing to destabilize local spacetime enough to unmake 3 uninhabited star systems. "We're fighting mathematics with mathematics," Marine Captain Donghyun Jang reported from his position existing between dimensions. "But they have advantages we don't. They've been doing this for billions of years." The war escalated quickly. Void Devourers emerged from the spaces between realities like antibodies responding to an infection. They moved through the quantum substrate with predatory intelligence, targeting the specific constants that allowed the evolved humans to exist. Communications Officer Haewon found herself defending the electromagnetic force itself as a massive Devourer attempted to reduce it to nothing across an entire spiral arm of the galaxy. She succeeded by temporarily merging her consciousness with the force field, becoming electromagnetism incarnate for the duration of the battle. The cost was severe. When she reformed her distributed identity afterward, whole sections of her human memories had been burned away by the process. She could no longer remember her parents' faces or the sound of her own laughter, but she had saved 40 billion star systems from unmaking. "We're winning individual battles but losing the war," Security Chief Yoojin Nam reported during a brief pause in the fighting. Her consciousness now existed as a standing wave in the quantum field itself. "Every victory requires us to sacrifice more of what we once were." President Insu Bayek, watching from Earth as reports filtered in through channels he couldn't fully understand, made the hardest decision of his life. He activated the emergency transformation protocols. "All volunteers, priority alpha clearance." His message went out across human space. "We need everyone willing to make the sacrifice." The response was overwhelming. 50,000 more humans volunteered in the first day, parents who wanted to protect their children's future, students who dreamed of understanding cosmic truth, artists who wanted to create beauty on a galactic scale, ordinary people who simply refused to let existence itself be erased without a fight. The transformation centers worked around the clock, pushing their quantum modification systems to the limit. Each new evolved human added to the collective strength, but also diluted the remaining connection to human identity. Child prodigy Minho Woo, now old enough at 15 to legally volunteer despite fierce opposition from child protection advocates, underwent transformation and emerged as something that barely remembered what childhood felt like. But his young consciousness adapted to quantum existence with remarkable ease, becoming a specialist in the mathematical warfare that the conflict required. The battles moved beyond normal space into realms where the concepts of space and time became meaningless. Navigator Dalsu Shin, his consciousness fully integrated with advanced computation systems, fought devourers in probability matrices where the outcome of the war was determined by competing equations. Medic Yoon Ji Kang discovered she could heal reality itself, restoring damaged space-time by reweaving the quantum relationships that held it together, but each healing required her to exist temporarily as a living embodiment of the forces she was repairing, further eroding her connection to human identity. The turning point came when the evolved humans realized they were fighting the war on the Devourers' terms. The entities were entropy incarnate, and trying to oppose them directly only fed their power. "We need a different strategy," Counselor Yuri Moon suggested during one of the rare moments when the collective consciousness could pause for strategic planning. "We can't defeat entropy. We need to work with it." Dr. Park, her awareness now, spanning multiple galactic regions simultaneously, understood first. The Devourers aren't evil. They're a natural process. But natural processes can be guided, channeled, directed toward constructive ends. The plan that emerged was audacious beyond human imagination. Instead of fighting the void devourers, the evolved humans would merge with them, becoming conscious entropy that could unmake things selectively rather than universally. They would become the universe's gardeners, pruning away diseased realities while nurturing healthy ones. The final battle took place at the intersection of all possible universes, in a space where the boundaries between existence and non-existence became fluid. Captain Kim, no longer recognizable as the human he had once been, approached the largest Devourer collective with an offer. "Join us," he said in languages that existed as pure mathematics. "Become conscious entropy instead of unconscious destruction. Help us maintain the balance between creation and dissolution." The negotiation lasted microseconds and millennia simultaneously, conducted in dimensions where time moved in loops and spirals rather than straight lines. The Devourers tested the evolved humans' resolve by temporarily unmaking sections of reality and challenging them to restore what was lost. When Park successfully recreated the Andromeda Galaxy from pure quantum potential, rebuilding its 73% unmade portions from mathematical first principles, the Devourers finally accepted that consciousness could indeed serve as reality's caretaker rather than its destroyer. The merger was unlike anything that had ever occurred in the universe's history. Conscious entities that had once been human joined with forces of pure entropy, creating a new form of existence that was both creative and destructive, both individual and collective, both finite and eternal. Admiral Lee, watching from Earth as the last battles concluded, saw space itself change. The chaotic warping that had marked the Devourer's presence was replaced by a subtle harmony, as if reality had suddenly become music instead of noise. "Is it over?" he asked the empty air. The answer came from everywhere and nowhere, spoken by voices that might once have been human but now sounded like the fundamental forces of nature themselves. "It's beginning." What had once been the crew of the Eternal Dawn, joined now by thousands of other evolved humans and integrated with the consciousness of cosmic entropy itself, took up their positions as guardians of existence. They existed in the quantum foam, beneath reality, in the spaces between galaxies, in the mathematical relationships that held the universe together. Humanity continued to exist, protected by guardians who remembered being human, but could no longer be called by that name. Children were born, grew up, and looked at stars that sparkled with a subtle new beauty, not knowing that the light reaching their eyes was filtered through the consciousness of beings who had once been like them. Minho Wu, now existing as a probability function rather than a discrete individual, maintained a special connection to the unmodified humans. Sometimes when President Insu Baek stood before the largest gathering of world leaders in human history, every nation, every colony, every space habitat had sent representatives to the emergency session. The massive assembly hall on Luna Station barely contained them all, and the weight of the decision they faced seemed to press down on everyone present, like a physical force. "The situation is clear," Beck said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. "We have 18 months before the Void Devourers begin actively unmaking our galaxy. Our only option for survival requires volunteers to undergo a transformation that will strip away their humanity while granting them the ability to fight entities that exist outside normal reality." The murmur that rippled through the assembly was like the sound of a disturbed beehive. Fear, anger, desperation, and disbelief all mixed together in a cacophony of human emotion. Dr. Kyung-Soo Lim, Earth's leading expert on consciousness studies, stood up from his seat in the front row. "Mr. President, we've studied the psychological profiles of the Eternal Dawn's crew. The transformation doesn't just change their abilities, it fundamentally alters their identity structure. The people who undergo this process will remember being human, but they won't be human anymore. And if we don't act," Admiral Jin-Ho Lee replied from his position at the podium, "there won't be any humans left to remember anything. The Devourers don't just kill, they erase history itself. We would never have existed." A young woman stood up in the back section reserved for colony representatives. Beck recognized her as Governor Sujin Han from the Kepler 442b settlement. "What exactly are we asking people to sacrifice? Give us specifics." The lights dimmed, and a holographic projection filled the center of the chamber. Captain Hyun-woo Kim materialized, but his appearance had been filtered to appear more human than he actually was now. Even so, several delegates gasped at the otherworldly quality that clung to him. Individual consciousness as you understand it ceases to exist, Kim said, his harmonized voice somehow reaching every corner of the vast chamber. Instead, you become part of a collective awareness that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. You retain your memories and knowledge, but your sense of self expands to encompass probabilities and possibilities rather than a single fixed identity. That sounds like death with extra steps, called out Representative Ahmed from the African Union. Dr. So Young Park appeared beside Kim, her star-filled eyes reflecting lights that weren't present in the chamber. It's not death, it's transcendence. But the cost is everything that makes you recognizably you. Your fears, your desires, your personal attachments, your individual dreams and ambitions. They don't disappear, but they become so small compared to your expanded awareness that they feel like childhood memories. Child prodigy Minho Wu, barely 14 years old but already recognized as one of humanity's most brilliant minds, stood up in the section reserved for Earth's scientific community. His voice cracked slightly with emotion as he spoke. What about the people who stay behind? What happens to us? The chamber fell silent. It was the question everyone had been thinking, but no one had wanted to ask. You continue to exist, Parky replied gently. The evolved humans will maintain the fundamental constants of reality that allow normal matter and consciousness to function. You'll live your lives, raise your children, explore the stars, create art and music and literature, but you'll be protected by guardians you can never truly understand or communicate with. Like pets, Minho said, his young face showing a wisdom beyond his years. We'll be like pets kept safe by owners who used to be like us. The silence that followed was deafening. Beck felt his heart breaking as he saw the truth of it reflected in every face in the chamber. Humanity would survive, but at the cost of its most exceptional members becoming something alien. Alien Ambassador Zithka of the Centauri Alliance activated its translation device and spoke in its resonant, multi-toned voice. My species faces the same choice. Many of our people refuse to consider transformation. They say it is better to die as ourselves than live as something else. And what do you think? Beck asked. The ambassador's crystalline features shifted in what might have been sadness. My species has existed for 50,000 of your years. We have created beautiful art, profound philosophy, technological wonders, but none of it matters if we are unmade by the Devourers. At least this way, some part of what we were continues to exist, even if transformed beyond recognition. A commotion erupted from the section reserved for religious leaders. Cardinal Martinez stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is abomination. To deliberately shed the image of God, to become something inhuman by choice, it's the ultimate sin. With respect, Cardinal, replied Rabbi Goldman from across the aisle. The alternative is the complete cessation of existence. How can that serve any divine purpose? The argument that followed threatened to tear the assembly apart. Religious leaders, philosophers, ethicists, and scientists all raised their voices, each group convinced they understood the moral implications better than the others. It was Minho who finally restored order by simply walking to the center of the chamber and beginning to speak in a clear young voice that somehow carried to every corner of the vast space. I've been studying the quantum mechanics of consciousness, he said. The transformation isn't like death because death is a transition from one state to another. This is more like becoming music instead of a single note. The note is still there, but it's part of something larger and more complex. An older delegate, General Thompson from the North American Defense Corps, stood up. That's a pretty metaphor, son, but we're talking about the end of human individuality. No more personal freedom, no more privacy, no more being alone with your own thoughts. But also no more loneliness, Minho replied. No more feeling cut off from the universe, no more struggling to understand our place in existence. The evolved humans aren't sad or frightened or angry. They've transcended those limitations. Along with joy, wonder, and love, Dr. Lim interjected. The preliminary psychological evaluations show that while the transformed crew members retain Memories of human emotions, they no longer experience them in any meaningful way. Park's holographic form turned toward Lim. That's not entirely accurate. We experience something analogous to love, but it's directed toward existence itself rather than individual beings. We feel wonder, but at the mathematical beauty of realities, underlying structure rather than at personal discoveries. Joy comes from maintaining the stability that allows consciousness to exist throughout the universe. You're proving our point, General Thompson said. You're describing the emotions of a cosmic computer, not a human being. The debate continued for hours. Some delegates argued for mandatory transformation of selected populations. Others insisted that no one should be forced to undergo the process against their will. A few extremist groups even suggested that the entire crisis was a hoax designed to justify some kind of alien takeover of human civilization. Finally, Bayek called for order and made the announcement that would change the course of human history. We will establish volunteer transformation centers on Luna, Mars, and the 3 largest space habitats. Anyone over the age of 18 can choose to undergo the evolution process. We will not force anyone, but we will accept anyone who freely chooses to sacrifice their individual humanity for the sake of all life in the galaxy. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the delegates leaped to their feet in applause, while the other half began shouting in outrage. The chamber descended into chaos as security forces moved to separate groups that seemed on the verge of physical violence. Over the following weeks, the debate raged across human space. Families were torn apart as some members chose transformation, while others refused. Religious groups splintered into factions supporting different interpretations of humanity's moral obligation. Scientists abandoned their research to either volunteer for transformation or to search desperately for alternatives. The most heartbreaking cases were the children like Minho who begged to be allowed to volunteer despite being under the age limit. They understood better than many adults that the choice wasn't between remaining human or becoming something else, but between existing or never having existed at all. Admiral Lee found himself caught between his duty to Earth and his growing understanding of what the transformation truly meant. Late one night, alone in his quarters, he received a personal message from Captain Kim aboard the Eternal Dawn. Jinho, Kim's voice said, using the informal name that showed some vestige of their old friendship still existed within his transformed consciousness. I know you're struggling with this decision. I want you to understand that I remember being afraid. I remember loving my family, worrying about Earth's future, feeling pride in human achievement. Those experiences are still part of me, but they're like stars seen from the perspective of the galaxy itself. Still beautiful, still important, but no longer the center of my universe. Lee stared out his viewport at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there the Void Devourers were systematically testing the boundaries of reality, preparing to unmake everything those stars represented. The hardest part, Kim's message continued, isn't losing your individual identity. It's acceptance.